The river is within us. The sea is all about us. The sea is the land's edge also, the granite into which it reaches, the beaches where it tosses its hints of earlier and other creation, the starfish, the horseshoe crab, the whale's backbone, the pools where it offers to our curiosity the more delicate algae and the sea anemone. It tosses up our losses, the torn seine, the shattered lobster pot, the broken oar, and the gear of foreign dead men. On a halcyon day, it is merely a monument. In navigable weather, it is always a sea mark to lay a course by, but in the somber season, or the sudden fury, is what it always was. That was T.S. Eliot from Four Quartets. I am Peter Miller, Dean of Bard Graduate Center, and on behalf of the director, Susan Weber, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you here today for another one of our Trajan Research Symposia. Since 1989, we have, as Carl Schlegel has written, been experiencing a return of space. He was thinking, when he wrote it, of East and West, but it has become, I think, even more intensely of late, one of North and South. And in between, of course, lies the Mediterranean. It has dozed, the sea has, for centuries, at least in our imagination, whether, as with Braudel from 1949, as of 1571, and the Battle of Lepanto, or in Braudel's second edition of 1966, from the 1620s and the so-called Northern Invasion, or from 1700 in Braudel's last take on this material from the Modèle Italien of 1989. Weber, in 1905, put it even earlier, around the time of the Reformation. But doze it has. The Mediterranean became first a backdrop for painters, then a holiday zone, and finally a lifestyle choice. The scene, the conflict, the edge, the land's edge, had moved on, was elsewhere. That has all changed. That has all changed. The Mediterranean is again a fault line, if not a front line, and all of us have in our heads the indelible images of the shattered lobster pots, the boats, and the gear of foreign dead men and children washed up on beaches all over the Mediterranean. So to go back, as we will for this one day, to the 11th century, 12th century, 13th century, to the medieval Mediterranean, is to return to the Mediterranean as it once was, the place where the history of the world was made, and where it is again, where conflict and commerce came together, where convergence of all sorts was the order of the day. Perhaps by paying more attention to the ways in which conflict and cooperation, commerce and coordination flow together, we may be in a better position to think about the Mediterranean today, the Mediterranean in our somber season. That's the downer for the day. For the rest, it will all be the pleasures of learning, but learning is not disconnected from the world outside. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Abigail Balbale of the Bard Graduate Center, who's the organizer of this symposium, to talk about the themes of the day and its organization. Please.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to start with some more thank yous, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today and some of the questions we'll be addressing. There are three groups without whom today could not have happened. First, I want to thank Saran and Ravi Trahan's generosity, which established the Trahan Fund for Islamic Art and Material Culture at Bard Graduate Center, and which has made today's symposium possible. The Trahan's commitment to supporting the highest level of research on the arts of the lands of Islam has resulted in now 3 separate symposia, bringing together scholars from around the world, as well as several years of lectures that preceded those symposia. This particular symposium aims to examine the Western Mediterranean as an interconnected region without the usual national and religious lines that separate scholarship. This is also the goal of the Spain North Africa project, a group founded in Barcelona in 2010 by a number of the participants in the Mediterranean Seminars NEH Summer Institute there on hybridity in the medieval Mediterranean. I've organized today's symposium with the help of my fellow founding members and executive board members, Camilo Gómez-Rivas, who you will hear from shortly, and Linda Yale-Jones, who will be chairing the panel this afternoon, as well as Andrew Devereaux, who couldn't join us today. The questions we all started discussing in 2010 have animated much of my work since then, and today's transregional approach is inspired by and indebted to SNAP and its members. Finally, my colleagues here at the BGC have fostered a culture of collegial but rigorous debate and created systems that support the organization of a myriad of lectures and symposia. And today would not have been possible without the support of our director, Susan Weber, Dean Peter Miller, Dean Elena Simon, and most of all, the untiring efforts of Laura Minsky, who has ensured that everything today go off without a hitch. Also, a huge number of other supporting staff, including the student workers who are working right now, and all of the facilities staff who have set everything up for us so beautifully. Now, why art and ideology? In the 14th century, Ibn Khaldun described the successive stages of a dynasty in his Muqaddimah. The third stage, the one in which, quote, the ruler is in complete authority, is defined by the ruler's patronage of, quote, large buildings, big constructions, spacious cities, and lofty monuments, as well as commissioning of gifts to give to dignitaries and offering bounty to his subjects. The ruler articulates his power and his wealth through construction and through generosity, awing his subjects and his rivals with his wealth and compelling their loyalty, or as Marcel Mauss would say, compelling reciprocal generosity through gifts. But as Ibn Khaldun also suggested, the particularities of these spaces, objects, and gifts reflect the power of the ruler as well. As he wrote, quote, the monuments of a dynasty are proportionate to its power. When a dynasty is large, it can bring together workers from disparate regions who can work quickly to build new and impressive structures. Today we'll be investigating a century in which several new dynasties emerged in the Western Mediterranean, from the Normans of Sicily to the Almohads of North Africa, as well as the so-called Second Taifa states of al-Andalus and the newly expansive Christian kingdoms of Castile-Leon and Aragon. How did the rulers of these dynasties present their power through monuments, gifts, and objects? How did their incorporation of workers and materials from far-flung regions serve to reinforce their authority? If we think of ideology as a system of beliefs that a society, or at least its elite, creates to reinforce its sense of itself, where does it intersect with art? How does the artistic production of the dynasties that we'll be talking about today reflect the idealized vision their rulers and courts had of their societies? Where did they look to authenticate themselves and their power? Today we'll be hearing from scholars who work on subjects as varied as architecture, textiles, and manuscripts in Sicily, the Iberian Peninsula, and North Africa. How will the materials they present help us understand the myth-making of the people and the dynasties that produced them? Can we understand how these dynasties, subjects, and rivals saw this art? And can we see cases where they responded to each other? All these questions, which will be addressed in different ways by the scholars you'll hear from shortly, aim to elucidate the ideas, political practices, and cultural programs that these nascent dynasties deployed to claim and maintain power. So that's the big introduction to the ideas. I want to also give a little bit of a framework for what we're going to be doing today and a few practical notes. So we're going to start this morning launching right into a series of longer papers by scholars who have come from near and far to give talks. We're going to have 3 this morning, and then we're going to break for lunch. And then we're going to have 1 more this afternoon, then we'll break. We'll have a coffee break in the morning. We're going to break again in the afternoon and have another coffee break, and then we're going to have a panel of junior scholars, emerging scholars, graduate students, giving shorter papers. And then we'll have a concluding discussion. We are not going to have questions after every paper this morning. We're going to save questions and do them all at a question and answer panel that's going to happen this afternoon. One other thing to note about this morning, unfortunately, due to the overzealous or perhaps just misguided regulations that have gone into effect at the Department of Homeland Security in January of this year, Professor Juan Carlos Ruiz Souza, who was traveling from Madrid, was denied access to the United States because he has recently been to a conference in Iran. So he is unable to join us today, but very generously, Dr. Feliciano has agreed to read his paper in his stead, and we should all be grateful to her for spending this morning giving 2 papers instead of the one she had planned. Yes, thank you, Lily. But it is unfortunate and altogether disappointing that he can't be here with us. Also, for those who are watching via live stream, please tweet questions by the time we get to the question and answer period this afternoon. Hashtag Bard Grad Center TV on Twitter. We will be checking to see if there are questions that come in that way. I think that concludes all of the practical announcements that I need to make. I'm going to pass the floor to Camilo Gómez-Rivas, who is president of the Spain North Africa Project and also assistant professor of Mediterranean Studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He works on the social and cultural history of the medieval and early modern Western Mediterranean and has recently published a book entitled Law and the Islamization of Morocco under the Almoravids, the Fatwas of Ibn Rushd al-Judd from the Far Maghreb to the Far Maghreb, published by Brill in 2014. So, Camilo.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. And I'm just really happy to be here. It's mostly what I want to say. I decided I didn't write something to share with you because I don't want to tax your attention because you're going to get a lot of really thick stuff in a second. So I'm just here to represent this Spain North Africa project and how we're kind of tied into this. And we did some work basically in helping Abigail think through it, I guess, for several years, and then put together the call for papers and think about it, and read these delightful papers. We met in 2010 in a seminar, it was a summer institute on Mediterranean studies. Mediterranean studies is something that traditionally, as I understand it, has been used to question, decenter, problematize the history of culture or the history of national culture. It's a way of getting out, understanding the history of culture as something that is tied to the narrative of a nation or the trajectory of a nation, and instead focus on it from a different angle. I keep thinking of it as being the effect of going to a mountain on the other side of a valley and seeing it from a completely different perspective is one of the things that we have been wanting to do. So for example, I think like long-term questions about what is Spanish culture, what is French culture, there's a narrative of those and how they've developed either as literature or as material culture. And the Mediterranean framework allows you to break out of that and try to see it from a different angle. Our focus has been the Western Mediterranean. It's called the Spain North Africa Project, although I tried for that not to be the case because it's not just about Spain, of course. The papers that we have today are not just Sicily is here, and what's it doing here? Because that's the kind of perspective that we want to take, this multi-geographical perspective. So I think what would bring us together is we've been trying to bridge a couple of walls, a couple of mental boundaries that have formed over time. One is the disciplines that are associated with the national languages. That's a very clear one. So Spanish, and Romance, so Spanish, Catalan, and Portuguese on the one side, and then Arabic on the other. They form national academies and disciplines that don't often talk to each other, and we've tried to break that down as much as possible. And of course they have their co-representation in material culture studies, and of course there's the other divide of the modern and the pre-modern, which is also very influenced, let's say, by the European grand narrative of Renaissance and modernity, and we have tried to do that over and over. We've resisted, the Spain North Africa project has resisted making a home in a single discipline, and this is one of the reasons we're excited to be part of this. And we're going to try to keep resisting that, although there is an inertia that always pushes you in one direction. I keep getting questions like, do you just do history, or do you just do literature? And as far as we're going to continue trying to move from discipline to discipline to get those different perspectives, some of which come in today. Because a century like the 12th century is a very complicated century to look at. It's not a coincidence that, well, it's a full transformation of the religious, ideological, political, and material, cultural, literary, everything, I guess, system. There was a radical change in the 12th century. And you can see it including crusades, including a religious movement in North Africa, including a completely new architectural style, including, the first national epic in Spanish, and the revival of canon law. And this understanding that kind of change is good to decenter yourself out of seeing it just from France or from Spain or whatever that is, or Morocco, as well as you have to see it with a team. You kind of need a team perspective to try to understand the complexity of that. And I will leave you with that thought, and we will move to the first paper.